Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News. And today, let's go on to a story that I covered kind of a little bit a couple of weeks ago when it started popping up, which was all these weird things coming up on Lake Mead. And this article is out of Eerie News and it's titled Lake Mead Gives Up Its Secrets, Including the Dead. Unlike Lake Superior, that never gives up its dead, Lake Mead, with its unusual dropping water levels, has been giving up all its secrets, including those who've been enjoying a watery grave for at least 40 years. Lake Mead is located in Nevada and Arizona. It's a reservoir created by the Hoover Dam and the Colorado River, a project completed in 1936. In terms of capacity, it's the largest reservoir in the United States and has a surface area of 247 square miles. It provides water to 20 million people and 3 states in the Southwest. Increasing water demand and drought has brought Lake Mead to below full capacity since 1983. As of March 2022, it's at 31% of full capacity. During the construction of the Hoover Dam, the town of St. Thomas, founded in 1865 by Mormon settlers, was abandoned and flooded. It was a stopping point between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City along the Arrowhead Trail. The 500 settlers were forced to vacate their homes, and the last holdout left in 1938. The tallest structure lay under 60 feet of water. But now, the ruins of the ghost town are exposed and can be visited by tourists. However, long before the Mormons settled St. Thomas, there were other people who lived there. About 1000 AD, Native Americans came to the Moapa Valley of southern Nevada, which would eventually become Lake Mead. The Hopi called them Ancient Ones, or Hisasinum. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Archaeologists identified them as Anasazi, or the ancestral Pueblo people. In 1827, Jebediah Smith found artifacts while exploring the area. These belonged to the Pueblo Grande de Nevada. In 1924, John and Faye Perkins stumbled across the ruins of the Lost City. With the construction of the Hoover Dam, the Lost City was covered with water as well. In 1948, a Boeing B-29 Superfortress, which was testing a prototype missile guidance system known as a Sun Tracker, crashed and sits at the bottom of the lake. There are also 2 small planes that are lying at the bottom, keeping it company. In June 2011, a man's body was found near Calville Bay in the lake. It was Ruben Aguirre, 38, a boater who had been missing since May 31st. However, all these discoveries, while interesting, were documented. But after May 1st, 2022, the receding water levels finally reached the tipping point where secrets could no longer hide in the depths of Lake Mead. The first was a rusted barrel strewn up on the shore, a body crammed inside. There's good reason to believe the remains belong to someone who met with foul play, besides being stuffed inside a barrel, that is. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department said the man died from a gunshot wound, and based on his clothing and shoes, he's been in the lake since the mid-1970s to early 1980s. A few days later, a second barrel was spotted close to the Hemingway Harbor boat ramp, not far from where the first one came ashore. It had a small hole in it, which revealed it was empty. Before the end of the month, someone paddleboarding came across bones, which they thought belonged to a bighorn sheep. However, sheep don't have teeth with silver fillings. That's when it became apparent the remains were human. Located only 30 miles east of Las Vegas, many believe these might be victims of organized crime. Instead of a ride into the desert, it seems that a ride to the lake would be the last one you would make. During those years, Las Vegas tried to downplay its connection to the mafia. Now tourists can pay to take a mob tour. It's not a far stretch to believe these 2 discoveries are tied to Las Vegas mob violence. In 1976, Johnny Pappas disappeared. He worked in the Las Vegas casino industry, and he had underworld connections to Chicago. On the night of August 18th, he left to meet 2 men who were interested in buying a boat he owned. It was kept at Lake Mead. 3 days later, at the parking lot of Circus Circus, his vehicle was found with the keys in the ignition. Without proof he was dead, the news story about his disappearance faded from the newspapers. Unofficially, police thought Pappas' disappearance was the work of Tony Spilotro, who was suspected of more than 20 murders linked to the mob. Made famous by Martin Scorsese and Joe Pesci, Spilotro died in 1986. Could any of these remains be Spilotro's handiwork? Or any others who became the victims of Vegas's dark underbelly. According to Travis Heggie, a former public risk management specialist for the U.S. National Park Service, Lake Mead, along with Big Bend National Park, stand out as parks with a high potential for criminal activity because of their location. He suspects that not only what's left of the dearly departed can be found there, but the instruments that departed them from this life as well. As the water level drops, things that have always been there, forgotten and hidden, poke into daylight. No doubt there are many that expect Lake Mead has not finished giving up its dead. Charlie Hanks, the owner of the Blaspheme Boutique on the Vegas Strip and purveyors of dark products, is selling small bottles of what looks like dirty water, labeled Lake Mead Corpse Water. The actual ingredients are a concoction of witch hazel, glass rocks, dirt, and green mica. You know what? What do they call it? Let's look out. Let's look at the glass half full. No pun intended. Hey, somebody's being an entrepreneur about this. But let's see what else comes around out of Lake Mead. Let's see. The next story is out of the New York Post, and it's titled "Inside the Spooky, the Conjuring Home That Just Sold for $1.52 million." This Rhode Island home is simply spooktacular, and perhaps that's why it's just sold for more than its asking price. This early 19th century three-bedroom spread in the town of Burrillville, despite its charming historical touches, is actually the real-life haunted house that inspired the 2013 horror film The Conjuring. After hitting the market in late 2021 for $1.2 million, the apparition-heavy abode just sold for $1.52 million, or 27% above the asking price. The property, located at 1677 Round Top Road, measures 3,109 square feet, with features including handsome beam ceilings over wide plank hardwood floors, fireplaces, and wooden cabinetry in the kitchen. But it also comes with roommates in the form of ghouls, though it's not clear whether they contribute to paying the bills. The sellers, paranormal investigators Jen and Corey Heinzen, purchased the home for $439,000 in 2019 and spent 4 months keeping themselves to one room as a sign of respect for the spirits, letting them get used to us instead of barging in. However, that didn't stop a black-colored figure once seen looking in at them from the doorway of their room. Once we realized we were both awake and both seeing it, it was gone, Corey Heinzen said. The pair also have heard footsteps and knocks and have seen flashes of light in rooms that don't have lights in them. Okay. The new owner is a Boston real estate developer named Jacqueline Nunez, 58. She was one of more than 10 offers on the property, and one of the prospective owners interviewed by the sellers to make sure they met the requirements, including not living in the home for the buyer's own good. "This is a very personal purchase for me," Nunez, who was represented by Ricardo Rodriguez and Bethany Eddy of Coldwell Banker Realty in Providence, said. "When it hit the market, I thought, this is a property that enables people to speak to the dead." Nunez added she doesn't feel the house is home to a demon, but simply a structure that is uniquely an amplifier for our energy, attitudes, and beliefs. If your end goal is to be terrified, it can deliver. Or if you go there to connect with a loved one, it can deliver that too. Right? Let's see. Nice remodeling. Nunez plans to host events from the house with the Perrone family, members of whom previously owned the home and operated as a sort of learning center. Andrea Perrone, 63, lived there between 1971 and 1980 and told the Journal she and her family experienced spiritual activity there. For instance, during a seance in 1974, she saw her now 82-year-old mother, Carolyn, levitating in a chair before being thrown 20 feet from it and hitting her head on the floor. Other bizarre alleged occurrences, including children seeing ghosts they believed were actual people until they vanished, witnessing a broom moving by itself across the floor, smelling an odor of rotting flesh, and one child being slapped by an invisible force. The Conjuring, which became a franchise of horror films, is a fictionalized account of the Perrone family and their work with paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The original film didn't shoot in the just sold abode, and the Perrones, at the time of their purchase, hadn't been informed of the home's dark history of murder, rape, and suicide. Even the property's listing says it's rumored to be haunted by the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman, who resided there in the 19th century. Now, in my opinion, I'm not surprised that whoever bought it over the asking price, which, by the way, those people that bought it in 2019, they made a nice chunk of change on that. Good for them. I'm not surprised that they're going to do it basically as an attraction versus some place to live. And as far as the Perron family, you know what? If you're a kid, and the reason why I say this is I've spoken to people who have experienced, hauntings or weird stuff in their house and as a child, and they never want to revisit that place again. Even if they've grown up and everything, they stay away from it. And I know that the actual movie was quite fictionalized based, but still, I don't see how I would ever want to return to a place where supposedly you saw your mom levitate and get thrown across the room. It'd be like you couldn't pay me enough money. But that's just me. Okay, let's go on to our next story. This is out of Bloomberg, and it's titled Ancient Coin Celebrating Murder of Julius Caesar May Sell for $2 million. An ancient Roman coin commemorating the assassination of Julius Caesar could sell for more than $2 million when it hits the auction block in May, according to Numismatica Ars Classica, the rare coin auction house conducting the sale. The gold piece, slightly smaller than a U.S. quarter, is more than 2,000 years old. It's priceless, but it still has a price tag, said Arturo Russo, managing director of Numismatica Ars Classica. To have a coin that commemorates such a well-known event, such a famous event, an event that has changed completely the course of history, is quite extraordinary. This gold coin, the Mar, or the Ides of March, is said by the auction house to have been minted by Caesar's betrayer Brutus, who is depicted on the front of the artifact. Rome's freedom from Caesar's tyranny is represented by the cap of liberty in between the daggers. The cap was traditionally given to emancipated slaves. The coin is thought to have been worn by one of Caesar's murderers, a high-ranking official of the time after the dictator's death on March 15th, 44 BC. It's something absolutely astonishing to know that this coin has survived, Russo adds, especially since many coins of that era were traditionally melted down after the removal of a political reign. For the last 10 years, the coin has been on display at the British Museum on loan from a private collector. Russo says he hopes the winning bidder will be a collector or institution. There are 3 of these coins known to exist. One sold at Roma Numismatics in London in 2020 for a record-breaking 2.7 million, about 2.7 million pounds, about $3.5 million. The other is in the collection of the Deutsche Bundesbank. The Eidmar will be opening for bid when the auction takes place in person in Zurich at the Hotel Bauer au Lac on May 30th, which is tomorrow. Very interesting. And what's really funny is that all those, Brutus included, all those that participated in the murder of Caesar, they were hunted down. They all met really bad ends. And let's face it, Brutus doesn't have the best reputation. Now, let's go off to Scotland. This is out of the Glasgow Live, and it's titled Luibeilt Poltergeist Case and a Spooky Link with a Glasgow tenement flat. Nigh on 50 years ago, a young climber experienced a night of terror in a remote Highland bothy, and it would follow him back to Glasgow. In December of 1973, 18-year-old Phil McNeil and his friend Jimmy Dunn saw shelter at the ruined Luibeilt Lodge near Fort William, which the pair hoped to use as a base for their mountaineering activities in the area. But a sleepless night ensued that would stay with the men for the rest of their lives. Mr. McNeil said he and his friend entered the remote cottage at around 9 p.m. Outside, the temperatures were below zero, yet it would be inside the crumbling bothy where the pair really began to feel the chills. He said it was cold. That was the first thing. It was much colder on the inside than it was on the outside. And it felt odd. It just didn't feel right. We made our way around the house, and it became immediately obvious that the place had been vacated very rapidly. The table was set for Christmas. There were Christmas crackers on the table, but Christmas hadn't happened. The place looked as if people had upped and left all of a sudden. As Phil and Jimmy prepared to nestle into their sleeping bags, they began to hear unsettling noises coming from a bedroom upstairs, including the sound of footsteps and large items being moved around. The bedroom was empty save for a dismantled metal bed frame resting against one of the walls and a small boulder which had been curiously placed on the window sill between the olive green curtains. Mr. McNeil continued, almost the minute the candle went out, there were noises upstairs. The first noises which we hear footsteps upstairs in that room above. The second noise we hear is a dismantled metal framed bed being pulled away from the wall, and it sounds as though it was being put together. And then, a little while later, the third noise we hear is the boulder being rolled around on the floor. For a while the noises cease and the pair somehow manage to fall asleep, but around 4 a.m. they rudely awaken once more, and this time the spooky goings-on are significantly more localized. Phil said, "Now the noises aren't just in the room above, they're in our room. The entire room erupts. Things are flying around all over the place." He recalled how he lit a candle only for it to mysteriously launch itself across the room. He said books were also sent flying and the distinct sound of footsteps could be heard coming from the corner of the bedroom upstairs. Certain they had been alone in the house that evening, a distressed Phil and Jimmy collected their belongings and departed the cottage. As they left, they noticed that the olive green curtains that had previously been open were now closed. Phil made his way back to his flat at 39 Gibson Street in Woodlands, thinking this would be the end of his ordeal. How wrong he was. Phil explained how he had previously been well aware of claims of a paranormal activity on Gibson Street, but had paid little heed to the old ghost story. They included a case in 1958 involving a group of American students who lived in a flat in the street and had recorded haunting voices and items moving on their own accord. Keen to get to the bottom of his brush with the paranormal, a brave Phil McNeil ventured back to Luibeilt in 1975. As he and his friend Jimmy and David entered the house, they saw a message painted in stark letters on the wall. "This house is haunted. This house is evil." It was clear evidence that others had experienced what Phil and Jimmy had witnessed 2 winters earlier. Mr. McNeil returned to visit Luibeilt in the summer of 2021 and says the cottage now lies completely abandoned and uninhabitable. Okay, from 1973, that's a long time. There's got to be something wrong with this place. And for those of you watching the video, you could see this cottage is in the middle of nowhere. It's like there's a lot of land around it, and something's going on if it's been empty all these years. If that's the case that it turns out to be. And I was hoping that they were gonna say something about what the history is on this. Like, what was the previous? What was going on with this place, with this little cottage or this cottage that people up and left? Okay, if we're in Scotland, let's stay in Scotland. Okay, this is inside Glasgow's oldest and most haunted theatre. From the Paris Opera House's Phantom to Drury Lane's Man in Grey, every theatre worth its salt has at least one good ghost story. What else would you expect from a profession that refers to forgetting your lines as dying on stage? So it's unsurprising that Glasgow, with its impressive theatrical history, has more than one supernatural thespian floating around, especially in the Theatre Royal. The longest-running theatre in Scotland originally opened in 1867 as the Royal Coliseum and Opera House. The original Theatre Royal had been on Dunlop Street, only to be demolished to make way for St. Enoch's railway station. In 1869, the theatrical duo Glover and Francis took over the Royal Coliseum, renamed it, and the Theatre Royal lived again. Are the hauntings real, or simply the result of the overreactive imagination of people for whom imagination is a tool of their trade? Judge for yourself. As the oldest playhouse in Glasgow, it's understandable that the Theatre Royal has the odd creaking floorboard or that strange knocking sounds can occasionally be heard on doors that, when open, have no one behind them. Or could it be Nora, the theater's resident ghost? A cleaner who dreamed of a life on stage, she is said to have begged the theater manager to give her a chance. However, legend has it that when he gave in, the audition went so badly that poor Nora died of shame, and has haunted the theater ever since. Another version of the story suggests Nora was pregnant and spurned by her lover, the married theater manager. She jumped to her death in the theater itself. Some people say that she can still be heard in the upper circle moaning sadly and banging on the streets. But it isn't just the auditorium where people have had ghostly encounters. The theater's backstage has been the site of eerie wailing and thumps that can't quite be explained by a strange hand dropping a prop. Others have described feeling a ghostly touch on their arm at the theater bar when no one is around. Nora is joined by the ghost of a fireman who died in 1869 after an electrical fire broke out in the theater. The fireman, who unlike Nora doesn't have a name, is said to appear in full uniform in the orchestra pit and to play tricks on stagehands by moving things around. And if that isn't exciting enough for you, well, there's always the drama on stage. Interesting. And yes, I've heard that. Theaters are known for that. Let's face it. I mean, from what I understand, there's a lot of tumultuous drama or lives, whether it's the actors, the people that run it, a lot of things went on in those times. Let's see. Let's go on to Vice. Is out of Vice, and this is titled, "There are four malicious extraterrestrial civilizations in Milky Way, researcher estimates." Stephen Hawking famously said sending messages from Earth into deep space could get human civilization destroyed. If aliens ever visit us, I think the outcome would be much as when Christopher Columbus first landed in America, which didn't turn out very well for the Native Americans. Hawking's words have often been used to discourage the practice of METI, which is messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. But how many malicious alien civilizations are there? And what are the chances any message we send into our own galaxy would be received by an evil alien civilization? There is precious little research on this topic, and very few scientists have even posited a guess. A new thought experiment attempts to at least venture a guess in hopes that other scientists will begin to take METI more seriously and will try to determine how dangerous it actually is to try to contact alien civilizations. According to this paper, which the author admits has some limitations, there are roughly four malicious extraterrestrial civilizations in the Milky Way, and we could likely send out 18,000 interstellar messages to different exoplanets in our galaxy, and the probability of ensuring our own destruction would still be about the same as Earth being hit by a global catastrophe asteroid. The paper, which hasn't been peer-reviewed, is called "Estimating the Prevalence of Malicious Extraterrestrial Civilizations" and was written by Alberto Caballero, a PhD student in conflict resolution at the University of Vigo in Spain, and the author of a separate study published in Cambridge University's peer-reviewed International Journal of Astrobiology earlier this month that attempted to analyze where the famous WOW signal originated. Caballero says he had to make some assumptions that make it very difficult to know if his calculations are correct. To do the study, he researched how many external invasions there have been on Earth over the last 50 years, meaning countries that invade other countries. He then took that data and applied it to the number of known and estimated exoplanets and potentially habitable exoplanets based on Italian SETI scientist Claudio Massone's estimate that there could be as many as 15,785 civilizations in the Milky Way. The basic idea, extending earthbound ideas of conflict into outer space, will be familiar to fans of sci-fi fare such as The Expanse. Caballero concludes that the probability of a hostile alien race invading Earth is low, very low. The probability of extraterrestrial invasion by a civilization whose planet we message is, therefore, around 2 orders of magnitude lower than the probability of a planet-killer asteroid collision, which is already a 1 in 100 million years event, he writes in the paper. He also said that there is likely fewer than one malicious extraterrestrial civilization in the Milky Way that has also mastered interstellar travel, which would make them a so-called Type 1 civilization. 0.22 Type -1 civilizations capable of nearby interstellar travel, and 4.42 civilizations, if all of them were like humanity. We aren't a Type 0 yet. He said, I don't mention the 4.42 civilizations in my paper because 1, we don't know whether all the civilizations in the galaxy are like us, below Type -0, and 2, a civilization like us will probably not pose a threat to one another, since we don't have the technology to travel to their planet. We will reach that technology once we become a Type -1. Caballero told Motherboard in a phone call that as society has become more advanced, there have been fewer invasions, suggesting to him that alien civilizations capable of destroying Earth will be less interested in actually doing so as they progress technologically. I did the paper based only on life as we know it. We don't know the mind of extraterrestrials. An extraterrestrial civilization may have a brain with a different chemical composition, and they might not have our empathy, or They might have more psychopathological behaviors, he said. I found this way to do the study, which has limitations because we don't know the mind of what aliens would be like. I think, unfortunately, it's still quite a secret topic. No one seems to be willing to talk about it, he added. There's this fear of being afraid to send messages out there, but there's very little research on whether it's actually dangerous to do. Caballero understands that this isn't necessarily the most sophisticated science, but said he hopes that by putting a number out there, he can start a conversation about whether it's actually risky to send messages into space. The fact that the estimated probability of extraterrestrial invasion is 2 orders of magnitude lower than that of a planet killer asteroid collision should open the door to the next step, which is having an international debate to determine the conditions under which the first serious interstellar radio or laser message will be sent to a nearby potentially habitable exoplanet, he wrote. Now, I think this is really interesting because, besides the fact of, you know, we swing from little or no chance of contact with an ET race of any type, and then of course the ones where where you go into ancient aliens, they've been around from before, and they're in the backdrop of all these paintings, and all these ancient civilizations that had all these astronomy and building capabilities were because of they were getting help from extraterrestrials. So it swings in both ways. But again, we have to realize, what to us might be evil, to an ET that doesn't have a moral compass, which is not good or bad. It's just that, like they said, they don't understand. They just don't see things. Doesn't. In other words, we can't assume that if they would ever do something against us, it would be in a malicious form. And I'm going to use Hollywood land again as an example, like the movie The Predator. Okay. And you know that the Predator franchise has taken off, and basically they've taken that who's an extraterrestrial, and apparently their civilization, their species, everything for them is hunting, or basically being able to conquer species of different planets. Okay, and we're at the receiving end of it. Like, let's go with the first movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's hunting a bunch of soldiers in the jungle. He has his own rules, which is that if you're unarmed, you're pretty much okay, because all he's doing is collecting trophies. This is part of his culture. All right. Um, but we see it as something bad. And by this, my point is that if a human being did it, absolutely, of course, we're saying this person is a psychopath that's hunting humans for trophies. When you're talking an extraterrestrial race, can we still put that same label on them? By this, I'm not excusing it, because if we get the short end of the stick, it could be horrible. But it's, what if what they practice as part of their civilization or their culture to us would be like this? This is horrible. I mean, something to think about, considering all the stuff that's going on with UFOs. So anyway, guys, I will be back soon with more unusual news, and until then, take care.